I'd like to frame where Canada and North America are relative to standards, and I aim to have time for comments. But if something upsets you when I'm talking or something like that, please stand up or just wave around and I'll keep my eyes open. We need more dialogue about standards, and that's really my talk in a nutshell. The other thing that occurs to me after listening to much of the metadata conversation today is that a lot of what I've heard today is concerning keywords and, in effect, consumers and that type of thing. My talk's not really about that. It's really about communicating with end users and retailers and stuff like that, problems in the business-to-business end of the business. So, I mean, it's worth keeping in mind that I'm not contradicting anything about anything we might have learned about keywords today, but what I am trying to address is reasons why the end people may or may not be absorbing your data well. So is this what you want? And here's some points to consider relative to change. Indigo is asking for better metadata. Funders are asking questions about Onyx 3.0, and BNC sales data exists in part so that those savings can fund improvement to metadata. Now, they're all related. Retailers and other aggregators want improved metadata, and Indigo issued a major document last year. It asks, fundamentally, for data that's better matched to published standards. Funders talked to the industry, have been told that metadata is important. They responded by funding to advance it. And along with our activities and standards, BookNet does what it can to help further industry objectives. So, including tweaking our pricing to help you do that. Anyway, it's fair for these organizations to be asking questions, to ask if improving metadata is really an industry objective. And there was an interesting BISG session a couple of weeks back that focused on industry objectives. BISG held an in-house session on making the business case for Onyx 3.0. There's no recording or webinar available on this, though I should note BISG does post many of its webinars, and at least for the moment, I believe they're available for anyone. The setup was industry experts weighted heavily to companies that handle metadata, but balanced in that while there was only one retailer and one publisher, the data firms were ones that supported different constituents. Tricia McCraney was on the panel. She's at TechForum, and many of you know her. She's now with the UK-based firm Virtue Sales. Ask her about the session. And I'm not going to quote anyone directly. I'm paraphrasing. I'm taking what I learned from the session and just representing it. So don't feel, it's my words in all cases. So this was a central theme of the discussion, and I think a fair summation of the North American malaise, a lack of drivers for change. One way to put it more positively is we implemented Onyx 2.1 early, and it works really well, so it's hard to get too motivated about implementing Onyx 3.0, unless you're submitting digital, whereupon you might feel more like doing it. APIs of the future. Sounds so techy. This was also said, and I just wanted to showcase it because it's a good way to emphasize my next point. Future or not, APIs are just another format for metadata, and an API is no better definition of quality than anything else. Now, better metadata is more important than Onyx 2.1 or 3.0 is what I would say is one of the three conclusions from the session. And the panelists agreed that the focus should be on quality and not on its format. All agreed that 2.1 or 3.0 isn't the best frame for the discussion. The US retailer, a major one, was represented by truly one of the nicest men around, very even-tempered, very soft-spoken. And he played on that by being particularly brutal in what he said to make his points. I mean, you wouldn't expect him to be this way. He cited the number of staff, 30, employed to clean metadata. They get spreadsheets from over 1,000 sources, process APIs, as well as Onyx, and everyone agreed that multiple formats are still in play. I've paraphrased here what he thought about publisher keyword metadata. Our programming can scrape better keywords from your descriptions than you give us in Onyx subject keywords. He wanted to emphasize that this was newly supported data, not a legacy problem. It came out of a mature industry. trained in metadata, and it didn't meet his needs. Now, this is one of the reasons why I thought it was important to say that I'm talking about like the business-to-business part of this, is that there are companies doing metadata, like the keywords, extremely well. It just is, when you're talking to a retailer or an end user, is they have millions of records, and they're plowing through it using automation, and a small amount, the quality gets lost. He was also more optimistic. I'm sorry, I think, there we go. Give a retailer better series information and he can sell more books. And okay, part of his point was that the series information wasn't that much better either, but he also wanted to let publishers know that it would be used, there would be a return on investment if supplied. Indigo has stressed that they need better series information. Okay. So you have to look at it from an end user's point of view. Books are complicated, and a series is a complicated concept. Readers often know books by their content. The central character name of a series is a helpful guide. It's not just what you call your series isn't the only thing that they want as series information. Brand name is a type of series. And compiling a list of books associated with Frozen was something he cited, and it's something that BookNet Canada has also done. We both did it by hand. We literally did a subject search on Frozen, or a keyword search on Frozen, and removed the books that weren't from that brand. And the retailer's point in all this was that book metadata is not at its full potential. It hasn't been meeting the needs of retailers. It's not improving. Now, one of the other conclusions from this session was Onyx 3.0 is a superior metadata standard to 2.1. So this group may have said there were no drivers for change, but they did realize that 3.0 was an improvement. Collections in 3.0 was identified as a clear improvement, and it supports the type of series I just described. It can even support trading information for a series selected by another agency than the publisher, or library, retailer, or other source. Now, I'm not saying we are trading information using that yet, but Editor has prepared the way for it. Now, this is my humor slide, just so that people know if you want to read and laugh a little. It's fine, that's what it's there for. This is the final conclusion from the session, which is that somebody's going to make us use 3.0 someday. It hasn't happened yet. And it has to happen in part because we need the better quality and that 3.0 can handle it. And as much as I love the lyrics that I have here, change doesn't have to come because it's forced. It could come because we work to make it happen. So if this was a Marvel comic, who could defeat this Mao who chants, change must come at the barrel of a gun? And that organization sort of is the renegade that camel cases on T instead of I, and is our agent of change. And this comes up every year at this session because it's one of the things that isn't changing. Do any of Editor's activities actually make a difference to your day-to-day activities? I really want to emphasize they should. Not as a gigantic, all-consuming, all-cost thing, but something used in planning and understanding direction. That's what they do. They are a resource. They listen to publishers, retailers worldwide. They ensure that if something needs to be communicated, that there's a logical way to put it into the metadata, and they ensure that metadata breaks things up in a way that allows for the best possible definition and clear transmission, that it's usable by other businesses. So I'm pleased to announce that BookNet is bringing in Graham Bell. End of May, look for an announcement. Everything's still being finalized a little bit. So he'll be doing his Essential Onyx and Advanced Onyx, the same sessions he was doing down in the US. Not doing his theme, I'm afraid. And these will cover the full gamut of Onyx for books. It's recommended to do essentials before you move on to advanced, but in either one, I always enjoy his explanation of the contributor composite and how it breaks up the names the way it does. It's been unchanged through Onyx 2.1 and into 3.0 because it works so well. It's like a little clockwork piece of art. So this is a serious question. If the optimal metadata for trading names in publishing bibliographic information has been known for well over a decade, we're talking Onyx 2.1, 2005. If it's been known for that long, why are we trading the metadata in so many different ways still, business to business? 10% of the records in BiblioShare, and BiblioShare accepts only Onyx, it's only accepting the cream. 10% of the records in BiblioShare provide only person name inverted. That's a big mess to have to deal with. It means every aggregator out there is having to load person name inverted and clean it up for some publishers. Now, most of you are actually doing it better than that. I mean, so it's not a wide problem. Canadian publishers have a tendency of having better quality metadata. And in sympathy to you, retailers are not exactly running around doing things much better either. Clearly, contributor is on most records, and a contributor sequence number is provided on 97% of the records in BiblioShare. So you have to then ask, why are aggregators still using role codes, mapping various codes to one value, and then using a limited list to create what's displayed in what order for contributors? Virtually every publisher has been providing reliably sequenced metadata for over 5 years. So, and they probably do know that there are customers who would care about who designed the cover. So it's not unimportant metadata that is being sort of screwed up regularly. Now, one of the reasons why this is important is because Onyx 3.0 supports titles in a very similar sequenced way to contributors, the way that we've been doing it now, theoretically, for at least the past 10 years. So there's not much use of it yet, and you can understand why publishers might be reluctant to go to the problem of implementing it when there's so little use of contributors. And by the way, actually, that sequencing is an important part of using collections properly, so that whole series issue that I just referred to actually is dependent on your sequencing titles properly. And I know it always sounds like I'm saying everybody is doing it wrong, but the real issue is that everybody is right. Onyx allows you to communicate pretty much anything that you want and remain within the standard. If retailers need the data, they'll take it however it's going to be delivered. And is that what we mean by good Onyx? So I'm going to give a personal opinion here. So this is not BookNet, this is me. There's a very major flaw in this very important document. It doesn't say what our actual minimal expectations are about anything. It doesn't define quality. We don't say person name inverted on its own is a substandard and poor practice, or that it's acceptable. And every aggregator should prepare for it. So either could be true, depending upon how you want to look at it. Simply being clear that you should or shouldn't expect it would help the supply chain, though. And we don't say that one way or the other in this document. Aggregators just wait for the data and hope that the senders can use the standard. Here's another example from the BISG meeting. Retailers and aggregators have had difficulty loading files from multiple markets. I've heard this a lot, not only at this session, it's a thing. And something that end users want is multiple market metadata. But no one related that problem to the normal practice in our market of using sales rights as a proxy statement for retailer rights. Within the Onyx standard, sales rights represent what is held by the publisher on the specific ISBN. The publisher assigns rights to a supplier to act as their agent to deal with retailers. So Onyx theory tells you that the retailers look to the supplier for information on where they can sell the product. So there's a layer of information that is, in a sense, missing from our business-to-business transactions. And this is more clearly defined as markets in the Superior 3.0. Less than 10% of the Onyx 3.0 records in BiblioShare supply a market statement. They're all digital, by the way. So not assigning retailers to a clear market makes mixing data sourced from different markets hard. Joshua Talent was talking about this. I mean, I'm talking about it from the point of view of presenting data in the Onyx standard. He's talking about it from a slightly different thing, but it is a problem in the supply chain. And if you want proof, there's a recent Cory Doctorow column in Publishers Weekly that looked at this from the other side. As an author, sick of retailers not selling his books because of poorly assigned rights, he assigned them to the publisher expecting them to be used. They aren't. So a righteous Doctorow thunders that authors should start functioning as retailers so they can fill up the vacuum and benefit from the lost sales at twice the royalties. You've got to love a good Doctorow column, but this one is worth the read. But he is simply talking about the inability of the supply chain to simply allow an English speaker in Afghanistan to order a book that's available easily, that should be available easily. This is the part where it would be very nice if you held hands. Anybody? Please. We are the ones who have to choose to implement the improvements that retailers have said that they need. And we are the ones who need to implement the changes that publishers support. My data is your data. And we also need to learn to use PowerPoint. There we go. Right, there we go. Everyone has to not only make changes to your metadata, but you also have to develop the priorities about their use so you don't waste time and money on it. My answers to publishers asking where the return on investment is twofold. Either someone else should supply that piece of metadata and publishers should simply be ready to include it. The premise is my most recent blog post. You can read it if you're interested. Or we, as a supply chain, need to plan better to minimize costs. Editor's job is to supply the means. It's our job to make the choice to use the means. There are other priorities than just Onyx. Thema is another choice, and BookNet promotes it. I'm pleased to say that Canadian publishers are using it and starting to support it with fully developed coding, which is a change from last year and a good thing to see. And I can't say directly, but look for some encouraging news on Thema soon. There was a closed-door session and an announcement at the London Book Fair about support by a major retailer that's still under wraps. In truth, as Joshua said this morning, it's BISAC in North America, and this doesn't really affect that. But there will be an announcement soon that confirms that anyone using Thema is on the right track if they're looking for international support, particularly in Europe. Okay. It's not a choice between 2.1 and 3.0, and you shouldn't wait to implement. And let's get realistic here. I started this with referencing a meeting from the US, and the outcome of it was pretty ambiguous. The bulk of Canadian retailer data comes to them from US sources. Canadian publishers either have a need to sell in the US with the least friction possible, or are a Canadian subsidiary of an international company whose data is most likely sourced from the US, and it behooves us in Canada to be compatible in all ways with US metadata practice. Can we do anything and preserve that? Don't Canadians have to wait until the US acts? I really should apologize for this slide, but I did want to say that there's a lot of value in the US market and in their data practice. There's a lot of consistency and value in how they do things and why they do things, and we should never forget that. And I hope a solid US-sourced slogan is a reminder of it. But we can act like a market with interests outside of the United States and set priorities. Start saving metadata that we know we need to support, even if it's not clear it could be used in our own market or in the US. Worry less about 2.1 and 3.0 and more about what will help us sell books. Yes, we can assume that having useful metadata to trade regardless of the format, will lead to supply chain use because it's useful and it's 2017. Okay, I'm largely done my beration section. I've put together a package, if anybody is interested in it, of 3 things you might do today, and I need to make an announcement about an addition to the Canadian Bibliographic Standard, recommendations on dates. But in terms of my overview and my desire to make you, like join together in some sort of useful way, any immediate comments, feedback? I mean, I would like to say we need to have a dialogue between publishers and retailers that's more direct and open and prioritizing setting. So how do we go about doing that is actually the question we'd like to ask. You're lovely and blank. I can see that much. Okay, sure now. Get in touch with me if you want to join the Bibliographic Committee. And if you'd like to engage in the industry setting these priorities, that's its function. We're always looking for members. Okay, so the 3 things in Onyx 3.0 that are worth implementing, even if you aren't using 3.0, are contributor place. It's simply something that we know people need. Libraries are asking for it. Contributor place allows you to, in a repeating composite, to provide information on code values. The 2 most important ones are nationality, which will remain our Canadian author marker. So it is code 08. Use it with a single code in its own composite. That's how it's done properly. The other one that we know people want is where people currently reside in, code 04. And I've documented how to set it up and where you could put it into a spreadsheet associated with an ISNI. You should be using ISNIs. It's another good thing. So if you're interested in seeing it, there's nothing new that's not already in the manual in what I've put together, but I've isolated some information. I've done the same for collections where I actually just isolated the title element, basically, and to show how it's used, and provided some examples, because title element is actually, the title detail is embedded either as the product title or within collections. When you see how its options are and how it could be put together and sequenced, with a number by the way, it becomes very straightforward. And the last one is markets. We absolutely need to start supporting markets differently than we are doing now. Now, if that means that we are using sales rights as a market statement, then maybe we need to redefine what we're doing in a market differently, but what we're doing right now is recognized it's not working by retailers. So we need to actually start talking about that. Okay, the Canadian Bibliographic Standard. How many people are aware that there's a Canadian Bibliographic Standard? Yay! Few people. We've made an addition to it on dates. So dates are easily the most divisive part in any metadata exchange, and it's hard for any project to be on time, and every book is a project. So retailers are making promises to their customers based on dates, and if the dates are wrong, it is a problem for their planning. So that's how this starts. A major Canadian retailer of largely print physical books complains that they cannot rely on dates in the metadata. BookNet does a couple of studies, talks to some groups, gets useful and contradicting information. At the end of it, we had a choice of either doing nothing or issuing a statement to put it in perspective and offer solutions. And BookNet Canada's board of directors, not our committee, but actually the board of directors agreed to do the latter, which is the date recommendations for Canadian publishers. So to relate this back to the Onyx comments I've already made, I'd say this document exists because English language Canada is a distinct and separate market from the United States. Is that a surprise? Hope not. But in terms of actual metadata practice, an awful lot of companies treat the Canadian market as a price choice in their supply detail. So if accuracy in dates matters, you have to wonder how the same set of dates can apply in 2 markets. Does it matter? Well, a Canadian retailer said it did, and it hampers their ability to plan and service the Canadian supply chain, so yes. And I know of a number of publishers who want their dates respected by retailers in this market. So yes, it matters. I don't think you're going to find anything in this document that contradicts any advice in the North American best practices or violates any definition for Onyx. It just asks publishers to provide dates meaningfully and to update them when they change, which is actually something that many publishers don't do. So if you want to make one simple change, that would be one thing you could do. It asks that dates be provided according to US needs in the US market, and to do the same, not necessarily the same date, but to answer the same need in the Canadian market. Outside of the digital market, there is not a generic system of soft embargo dates supported in Canada. Again, this is a point of confusion, but the US does need this, and the Canadian market needs soft embargo dates to control the release of books, but there's no formal system the way they have in the United States to support it up here. You can get it if you want it by talking to retailers. So fundamentally, what this document does is ask everyone to respect that the Canadian market exists and provides guidelines about communication for that in Onyx, if there are relevant differences. And it comes down to, again, markets in Onyx, it's important. So there's motherhood and apple pie, and there's ma mère and butter tarts. Vive la différence. So read and use the Canadian bibliographic standard now with two documents, the Canadian author marker dates that work in tandem with the joint best practices that we share with the US market. And that's it for me. Any questions? Who could possibly have a question after that?
I do have one question back to the series.
Mm-hmm.
So, Dr. Allen, in his presentation about the series field and how BNN uses that so effectively to hotlink to like a nice, and on his slide it said Indigo does not use the series field. If you had said in your presentation that they want to use, or
Indigo has had a problem with the series thing, and quite frankly, they have had this problem with the series thing because publishers' metadata has issued series following the Amazon kludges that they feel they need to support. And it makes it hard for, I mean, they never really understood how to pull series information adequately out of the data. Indigo's previous practice, I mean, I'm speaking for them in very broad generalities and don't quote me in a sense, I think might be described as they looked at the data and did the best they could with it, is how they were doing things until recently. So in the past year, they produced a major document where they asked for changes. Those changes are somewhat delayed at the moment, but it is still their plan to follow this. And they sat down, they did studies, they talked to people, not actually that much to BookNet, but to other people, and wanted data presented as it's written in the standard in a way that they could use, because that they found they couldn't use data that they were getting for this type of things. Again, when you look at on sale date as within the Canadian market, it's just plumb confusing. It doesn't make sense. It's a hodgepodge. Series, they were having difficulties with. So yes, they want series information. They want to display it better. They want to actually up their game substantially in terms of their metadata presentation. Are they there yet? No.